Welcome to another episode of Integrated. This is the podcast where we examine the world around us so that hopefully we can come to terms with our nature by integrating the intellect and the will. I really hope that we can leave absolutely nothing in our lives untouched about the truth of who we are and what we are made for. My name is Angela Erickson and I am your host. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see little baby Veronica. She's just my sidekick. She doesn't leave me alone, which obviously makes sense. She's a baby. But today I have a great episode for you. I sat down with Trevor Alcorn over at Tridentine Brewing. We enjoyed a beer together, and I'm recording this a couple weeks later, but I saved this other Mass of the Ages beer so that I could enjoy it at least while I recorded the intro for this episode. This episode was a lot of fun. Trevor is just he's been super generous. Like, I don't know if you can see this in the background, but he sent me this really cool Blessed Carl like beer sign, a bunch of stickers, as well as like the beer labels that he had made into magnets. So they're like all over our fridge outside. They were inside, but the kids kept playing with them and like throwing them all over the place. So now they're on the fridge in the garage so that I can look at it every time I go in and grab a drink or grab extra milk that's out there or whatever. So, but yeah, and super nice also. He sent a third-class relic from Blessed Karl of Austria. So that was super nice. I'm really grateful, not just because of all that stuff. That was like genuinely a surprise. And the beer too. The beer was awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks to you. And it was enjoyable. I enjoyed the seltzers that came with it as well. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. Super generous, very nice. And actually, the package for a lot of this stuff, not the beer and the drinks, but all the other stuff, that arrived like the day after I had Veronica. It was such a funny surprise. Like, oh my gosh, here's all this stuff. And I just had a baby. So anyway, that's why I didn't make too many like big posts about it, because I had literally just had a baby. So anyway, Trevor was very generous with his time. We sat down, we talked about the history of beer in the Catholic Church and monasteries. We also talked a little bit about the science and like how beer is made, because I'm kind of a nerd. I like that stuff. And so I hope you find that part interesting. I definitely did. And then we even talked a little bit about the theology, I guess you could say, of drinking, kind of things that St. Thomas Aquinas has had to say about drinking, and what a good Catholic perspective is when we approach drinking, and how we can be prudent and avoid drinking to excess. Trevor gave some really good practical tips on that as well. So really good episode. I hope you enjoy it. And also, just a quick aside, my next episode will be an apologetics episode. I know I promised that in my last, when I started my series on pro-life stuff, but after getting sick and having some scheduling conflicts with my friend that I wanted to interview, I mean, I could have done this by myself, but I just think an interview is so much more engaging. And my friend Josh Brom over at the Equal Rights Institute, I mean, this is what he does. So I think you're going to love that interview. So make sure you're subscribed. Hit the bell so you get notified when that one gets published, because you're going to want to listen to it when Roe falls. I mean, Roe is right on the cusp of being overturned with this Dobbs v. Jackson case, so you're really not going to want to miss it. This is going to elevate your apologetics. It's going to take it right up to the next level, hopefully, so that you're more equipped to talk about abortion from a pro-life perspective as things heats up more. So anyway, subscribe, share with your friends, and let me know if you like this episode with Trevor. It was super fun. Thanks again, Trevor, for sending all that stuff. That was just like super generous. And yeah, I hope you all enjoy this episode. God bless you. Hi, Trevor. Thank you so much for coming on to Integrated with Angela Erickson. I'm really excited to talk to you today. We've had this interview in the works for a very, very long time. And would you mind telling us a little bit about you and Tridentine Brewing?
Yeah, of course, Angela. Thank you for having me on. I've been really looking forward to it for a while now, our interview. Yeah, absolutely. So I can tell you a little bit about Tridentine Brewing or Tridentine Brewing, however you want to say the word. I think
I know you
everyone has a
like
different way to say
Tridentine
it.
over. I initially thought it was Tridentine, and so then when I heard you in a different interview say Tridentine, I was like, oh man, I've got it wrong in my brain. So I've been reworking it every time I see it. Tridentine Brewing.
Yeah, you know what? And I'll admit I might be wrong. Actually, I've had some priests tell me it's Tridentine, and I've had other Latin scholars tell me it's Tridentine. But I just
Ooh.
like the gum. When you put the gums together, trident and dentine. That's what I'm going after is just the gum
Oh yeah, the
together. But
similar.
yeah.
It is what it is.
But in any case, let me tell you a little bit about Tridentine or Tridentine Brewing. And the brewery itself, it goes way, way, way back, or at least let's just say the roots of the brewing. On my maternal side of the family, my great grandmother actually, who was a Polish immigrant in Chicago during the Great Depression and during Prohibition, actually would make beer in her bathtub
She
in
sounds like my kind
Chicago.
of lady.
Yeah, she does, right? I mean, yeah, sounds
That's
awesome. Well, I
hilarious.
mean, the idea sounds interesting. I don't know how much I'd like to drink beer fermented in a bathtub,
Did you go to
but
college? I'm
that's
just kidding.
yeah. I did go to college. I was homeschooled, but I did go to college, a dry college that is.
Oh,
So
good for
yeah,
you.
maybe I
I
haven't heard
made
of
too
it.
many mistakes at that, but anyway, I'm
So
glad you were
yeah,
spared.
yeah, I was spared, whether I'd like it or not. So no bathtub beer for me, and that's perfectly fine. So, but that's like the early roots, and then it kind of picks up with my maternal grandfather in the 1980s. So a bit of a gap there, but he started brewing in the 80s and 90s, and he involved my father's son-in-law in brewing. So they would brew batches together back then. And my father, who's now a brewmaster, he kind of took a bit of a hiatus after my grandfather passed away in the late 90s. And we really didn't pick it back up again until right about 2013. So my parents were moving out of their house, and I found all the old brewing supplies in our basement. And I asked my father, hey, can you teach me how to brew? And so that really started from there. And we would brew
That's awesome.
maybe once, two to four times a year. We actually brewed for a good like 5 years. So just a little side hobby. But we got to a point right around 2018 where we wanted to take things maybe to the next level. We were really interested in brewing, want to really delve in a bit deeper. And my father was nearing a point where he wanted to retire, and so we thought, okay, let's take the next step into what's called all grain brewing. So previously we had been brewing with what's called an extract kit, which is really the entry level way to brew. And you can almost think of that as if I was to explain it in regards to like baking, it's almost like you would go to the store and get a
Like a
Betty
box
Crocker,
of
like a
cake
box.
mix. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like a box of cake mix type, analogy if you were to compare it. And I mean, you still are baking, you still are brewing when it comes to extract, but it's not really the full-fledged thing. So we wanted
Yeah.
to take that next step, which required a bit more equipment, a lot more expertise. And so we embarked on a new, on a new venture to expand into my basement. So I had an unused space in our basement. It was an old cistern. I live in a Victorian home. And so I remodeled this cistern, which hadn't been used in, I have no idea how long, but it's an old water tank basically. And so we completely remodeled it. That was a project in 2019, installed all of our equipment down there. And then we were able to, as soon as my father retired in 2019, really get going on brewing with extract. Or I'm sorry, with all grain brewing. Now, the whole concept of Tridentine Brewing really solidified actually in 2019 as well. So it's not like we had been brewing under this idea or this initiative as Tridentine Brewing this whole time that we were brewing. We just finally decided, okay, let's name this thing that we're doing. And so we went through probably brainstorming session about 30 different names, and we finally decided to land on Tridentine Brewing because of our family's great love for the traditional Latin Mass. So that's what drew my father actually into the Catholic Church. So he's a convert to Catholicism.
Oh, that's really cool.
And yeah, so there's a whole nice backstory there. So my family's been going to traditional Latin Mass. I have since I was about 5 years old, and so yeah, long storied history there. And so we wanted to definitely honor the church and God through our brewing, and so we went with that particular name. And then we decided, okay, let's take it to the next step. Let's do some branding with it. So my brother is actually a graphic designer and a web developer, and so he's helped us with all of our labels that we do and our logos. So anything that you see related to Tridentine Brewing has got my brother Cameron's touch on it, artistic
awesome.
design.
Well, speaking of, we do have brews today. I'm really dying to try this, so I have to get this in here. This is the Mass of the Ages Belgian wit beer. Is that how you pronounce it? Wit beer?
That's right. Yes.
Wit beer.
Yes, Belgian wit beer.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't speak any of that, so here you go. Here it is. And tell me a little bit more about this logo, because this is one that your brother did not do, but you did a collaboration both with Mass of the Ages and with Chris Lewis over at Beartooth Catholic. So how did that come about?
Yeah. So typically with our labels, we will actually source the main design. So usually my brother creates something around an image.
Okay.
So he had some he was involved with the creation of it as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So the main image there is from Chris Lewis. And the image itself is also called A Mass of the Ages. Oh yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. Actually, Chris Lewis originally designed that label in conjunction with Jacob Tate and Cameron O'Hearn over at Mass of the Ages.
Okay.
So that's their like official logo or main brand image for Mass of the Ages. So if you went to their website, latinmass.com, you see that image right there on the homepage of the website. And so, that's really cool. We collaborated with Chris Lewis over at Beartooth and with Jacob Tate, is who we primarily worked with to create the label and, of course, what style of beer that they wanted to have represented for Mass of the Ages. So actually, this isn't even the first time we've worked with Chris Lewis. So we've actually had a few other designs as well. So we've got this one, which is I don't know if you can see it, Stella Maris it's called, which is our
I can kind of see it.
Baltic Porter. Yeah, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, the lighting is harsh a little bit, but there we go.
Yep. So we got that, and then we've got another one for which is Christ the King. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but
we go.
We've worked with Chris a few times, and yeah, Chris has got a phenomenal skill set at illustration.
His work is incredible.
Yeah, it's really amazing what he's able to do. Like, it still looks modern, but yet it's still classical at the same time. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I haven't seen the two that married together so well. I just find a lot of artwork to be kind of effeminate. Like Jesus is always depicted as effeminate Jesus. Basically, he's never masculine. It's very rare to see him masculine or even any of the male saints or everything is just so castrated today. And you see it portrayed in artwork, right? I mean, artwork is important for creating culture and preserving culture. And so even things like brewing beer, the things that we do that facilitate and grow culture and community are really, really important. And how we depict that is really important too. And I just love that you guys came together for putting out Mass of the Ages and doing this collaboration. Yeah, and we had Jacob Tate. For anyone who maybe hasn't listened to that episode, I did have Jacob Tate on. I want to say episode 10. I think it was just a couple of episodes back. So if you haven't listened to it, I definitely recommend it. We talk a lot about their first installment of Mass of the Ages, and then we kind of lead up to the release of their next installment, episode 2, right? And you've been really good on social media about promoting that too. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's a real. I'd highly recommend any. Well, I know you're going to do a review for it, so I'm really looking forward to your review. And I won't say too much more about it, other than I thought it was excellent because I got to go to one of the premieres that they're doing for episode 2 around the country. They had one in Chicago a few weeks back, and yeah, can't say enough good things about it. But looking forward to your honest review for that as well, Angela.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, so what kind of moving? First of all, I want to try the beer. I'm not just going to sit here with it in front of me.
Cheers.
Cheers. That was really good. Thank you. I'm like really hot
yeah, of
too,
course.
so it's perfect. There we go. Oh, that's really good. I'm glad you sent 2.
There you go. You can.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say the next thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about is you guys have chosen Blessed Karl of Austria as your patron saint. And okay, so with Integrated, I like to try and talk about how we bridge the gap between like the body and the soul. And you guys have done a really good job like offering this as a way to glorify God. And right, we're called to do that in all of our work to glorify God. And one way that you've chosen to do that is by having Blessed Karl of Austria as your patron saint. So how did that come about exactly? Like, is there like a family devotion that has been long-standing with Blessed Karl of Austria, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, Angela. So I've actually personally had a long-standing devotion to Blessed Karl of Austria now for approximately, over a decade now. Probably 10 to 12 years. And actually, I was really drawn to Blessed Karl. I think different people are drawn to Blessed Karl for different reasons. So he was a great political leader as an emperor and a king. He was a great family man and a great father and a husband as well. So there's different aspects of his life that attract different people. And for me, I was initially attracted to Blessed Karl. Before I was a father or a husband, was to the political aspect of things, because I've always had a great interest in history, a great interest in politics. And actually, about 11 years ago now, I ran for political office in my town as a trustee or as a board member for our city council. And as I was doing that, I was looking for just Catholic saints that I could look up to and could serve as more of a model for me. And I happened to run into Blessed Karl in my searches. And, he was obviously involved in, I shouldn't say obviously because I don't know, the audience may not know, but he was.
Not everyone knows. I had never heard of
Austria-Hungary.
him until I came into your work. Yeah, I had no idea who he was. So, yeah, it was all news to me.
Okay, yeah, so I can touch on it real quick. So he was the last emperor of Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary was previously the Holy Roman Empire. So really, he's the successor to the Holy Roman Empire as the emperor. And so he was the emperor from 1916 to 1918. And he's somewhat obscured, and at least if you were to go to just like any common textbook on World War I, you'd hear a lot about the United States and Germany and things that are going on in Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution, but you don't hear too much about Blessed Karl. And so even though I was a history buff, I didn't really know too much about Blessed Karl until I dug in a little bit more and learned more about him. And his life is truly extraordinary. In fact, I I would highly recommend the audience, if they can, go ahead and take a look at this book. It's by Charles Coulomb, and I'm sorry the reflection is all over the place, but it's on the life of it's Blessed Charles of Austria, Holy Emperor and His Legacy, and it's by Charles Coulomb, and that's a fantastic, very readable book on his life. And he only lived a very short time. In fact, I believe he died when he was maybe 33, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's in his 30s. Yeah.
But, yeah, he was right in his early 30s. But he did his best to try and bring the world back from war. He inherited the throne during war from his predecessor, Franz Joseph. And he tried to do everything, even giving up territory, doing what he could to sign a peace treaty to stop the slaughter. And so he's known as the Peace Emperor, actually, for his work attempting to do that. And he was a very well-beloved emperor by his people. In fact, so much that a recent pope was actually named after him, that you might know. So actually, John Paul II was named after Blessed Karl.
I didn't
so
know
Karol
that.
Wojtyła. Yeah, so his
really
father, John Paul II's father, was actually in Blessed Karl's army. And so he was really impressed by Blessed Karl, St. John Paul II's father, and so he named his son after him. So
Wow.
Karol in Polish, but so
Right.
yeah, he's very well beloved. Was an amazing husband and father. In fact, his wife was very saintly, Zita, so Empress Zita, and in fact, she's also going through the steps for canonization. So she's servant of God right now. So definitely look
so
into
amazing.
Zita as well. So yeah, very, very holy couple. And again, we don't have very many role models, unfortunately. Certainly in the United States, we don't have very many good Catholic role models. If we look even at our Congress, in fact, it's the complete opposite usually in most cases, right?
Yeah.
So they're really good to look up to as exemplifying what a good marriage looks like, being a good husband and a good political leader. So that's initially where I got my interest in Blessed Karl. And to kind of fast forward from the politics side of things, my initial interest into where we're at now, when we started brewing, I thought we have to do a Blessed Karl themed beer. So what better type of beer than a Vienna lager? So that's a beer style. Vienna is the capital, or was the capital, of Austria-Hungary. And so we decided to do that beer in Blessed Karl's honor. And we named the beer Habsburg, which is a play on words. So Habsburg is the family name, or the dynasty that Blessed Karl is from, and so we just did a play on words there.
That's
and
cool.
so we brewed that beer, and I've had a great time with that beer. I think it's probably our most popular beer label, at least. Because there's such a growing devotion to Blessed Karl in the United States.
That's awesome. I love that. And I just, I think it's really cool to see other Catholics dedicating their work that way and sharing the good news, and giving real life examples. You're right. Like, you look around and sometimes it's hard to feel like there are good and holy people, especially when you look to politics. And we need more people who can be inspired by somebody like Blessed Karl of Austria. So way to go, you guys. That's awesome. One thing I did want to talk about before we kind of jump into more of the theology of drinking or the history of beer itself, kind of how that got started. But I'm actually very curious about like how much science is involved in brewing, because like I like to brew kombucha but of course it's not like a scientific thing. I mean, you get the SCOBY and you add the tea and you let it sit, I mean, there is some involved,
Yes.
but like for you're developing different flavors. How does that work? Like, how do you guys, I'm guessing different types of hops are going to develop into certain kinds of flavors, but then like what other types of manipulation are you doing to create so much variation between the flavors? I'm very curious about that.
Oh yeah, of course. And let me say this first of all, and this kind of goes into the beer history a little bit, but it really wasn't well understood, all the I guess the scientific facets of beer, until very recently. Even the last 200 years, until the last 200 years, it really wasn't understood until Louis Pasteur, even the role that yeast plays. In fact, the monks in the Middle Ages called the process for fermentation, they called it God is good. And in other words, it's divine providence that God is making this alcoholic beverage for mankind, because when really it still is, even though now we know the process that yeast plays, but still that's how they thought of the process back then. So it wasn't really well understood for thousands of years, really, what the whole process was. But yeah, let me speak real briefly on how we get the different flavors, how we come up with recipes. So usually the flavor of beer is predicated or based on a few different things. So beer is really comprised of barley, hops, and water, and then you add the yeast in for the fermentation. But it's really those three ingredients. So that's what you're looking at for your flavor profile and what you're going to get out of the beer and what different style you're going to get. So first of all, with the grain bill that you have, which generally is barley, but it could also include other things such as wheat or oats. I mean, some breweries even use rice, which, I mean, we don't use rice, but I mean, we're talking about like more like Budweiser or something like that. Uses a lot of rice.
Something weak. Just
yeah, something a little bit weak. So that in part determines it's a significant chunk of the flavor profile that you get. So, for example, if you are going to have a much darker beer, so such as a stout or a porter, then you're going to use much darker roasts or certain types of barley. So, as part of the process for or selecting your grains, you can get grains that are roasted a certain way. So see,
that's so interesting. I'm weird.
Greatly.
I think it's super interesting. I like nerd out on this stuff. I mill my own flour and stuff, so I think this is really cool. Sorry, don't want to interrupt, but
yeah,
I love this.
No, yeah, it's really interesting, and so there's I guess the brewing community, you might say, or home brewers are really avid about sharing recipes and being very, very wide open with what makes different styles of beer. So there's not a lot of secrets out there. I mean, you can go and generally create your own recipe based on what other people have said or tweak things, and so you get like a good idea of, okay, if I was going to brew let's just say a 15-gallon batch of beer, which is our max capacity right now, then I'm going to need 10 pounds of this grain and with this characteristics, and 5 pounds of this grain, and half a pound with this characteristic, and a part of chocolate malt, and so there's all these different things that you can put together that make up the grain bill in total, that give a huge proportion of the flavor profile that you actually taste when you drink the beer.
So then how long does it take? Oh, okay. That's just the first part. So then once you brew it, how long does it normally take to get that carbonation and that flavor profile where you want it?
Yeah. So that can depend on the style. But generally, so what happens is we'll have a brew day, and then after brew day, we'll go ahead and put the beer in the fermenter, and the beer sits there with the yeast, and the yeast does its magic, and it creates alcohol in the beverage, and
God is good.
Then it creates beer. God is good. That's right. And so then that process really it varies. So it could be a few days to a couple of weeks that the beer's in the fermenter, and actually depending on the style of beer, you could even leave the beer in the fermenters for a few months. So, for example, a lager type is a type of beer, like an ale is a type of beer. So an ale and a lager are differentiated by the styles of yeast that are used. So ales are top fermenting yeast, and lagers are bottom fermenting yeast. And so the lager yeast likes to live on the bottom. It likes it colder, and it likes long period of time to do its work. And so even after its work is done, you're supposed to leave the beer right above freezing, so usually in 30 degrees Fahrenheit range, and it can sit there for a few months. So that's traditionally how lagers are done. But for us, yeah, usually it's a couple of weeks after. For most of our beers, especially the ales, it's a couple of weeks after we've had brew day that we're then able to bottle the beer. And then after we bottle the beer, it usually takes about a couple of weeks for carbonation to really kick in, so to be fully available. So you're not just drinking like a flat pop or something that's been sitting out all day. I mean, that's basically what it tastes like if you just get it right out of the fermenter and drink it. It's just flat. So you have to have that carbonation for it to actually.
So how does the carbonation work? Because like when I brew kombucha, for example, and you do the second ferment, basically, you have to add sugar to the tea, like some type of sugar for the yeast to feed on and develop like this carbonation before you stick it in the fridge. Yes. And when you stick it in the fridge, it loses a lot of that power. Like you almost have to, sometimes you have to release, like open up the bottles once a day to make sure they don't explode. So how does that work if you're bottling it and then letting it continue to ferment, basically, or like develop the carbonation without the bottles exploding?
Yeah, so the carbonation can be obtained a few different ways. So it's really very similar. It's the sugar. So the yeast actually consumes sugar that you put into the beverage. So let me just say this: you can use sugar, but there's also another way to carbonate, which is through CO2. So we've been also putting CO2 into our tank, and then pressurizing it, and then bottling off of that. So that's one way that you can do it.
Okay.
But we still do it with sugar too. So you can dissolve sugar. You can get these sugar tablets, and you can put that into the actual bottles as well. And then the remaining yeast that's still in the beer, because beer is still a living thing. The yeast is still in there, probably in the beer you have right now even. And so, the yeast just consumes the sugar, and then it creates the CO2, and that's the carbonation. So you're right. If you over-carbonate it, it'll explode. And we've had a few bad experiences along the way. There's a lot to learn when you brew and you home brew, and sometimes there's some unfortunate things that happen. And so over-carbonating is a real thing. But if you get it just right, and there's this, depending on how you do the carbonation and the sugar and determine it, there are certain measurements that you have to do in determining this is how much sugar we have. Otherwise, it's going to be under-carbonated or over-carbonated, and then things are going to explode.
Yes. Yeah. I recently made the mistake of, I had this kombucha that I was flavoring with strawberries that I had pureed basically with some, maybe it was just strawberries. Anyway, I let it carbonate too long, and when I popped the bottle open, I had like strawberry flung all over the kitchen, basically all over like my cabinets and stuff. I had so much cleaning to do, but I was very grateful it just didn't explode in the cabinet to begin with, because that would have been way more messy. But I've always wondered that with brewing beer, because I'm like, you're just brewing so much at a time, and the similarities are interesting, but it makes sense. I mean, fermenting is a process for food and beverages or whatever, and the yeast has to be present, it has to be fed. But anyway, out of the nerdy brewing part of it, okay, because I've always, as curious as I've been, maybe not everyone else is interested in that as I am, but you kind of touched on the history a little bit of brewing beer and how monks brewed beer. What is some of the history behind it, and how's the church viewed drinking alcohol? Because I think this can be a point of contention, even sometimes among Catholics, like whether or not it's acceptable to drink, or is it really possible to drink in moderation without getting drunk? I think some people don't think that that's possible. So what historically, how's the church viewed it, and then I have some other questions. We can go from there. I won't throw all of the rest of them at you at the same time. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. So let me just start real briefly with the history, which is, I mean, if we go way back, you know, there has been brewing beer and alcohol for thousands and thousands of years. So we really see the first signs of beer in ancient Egyptian civilization, and beer was not what you think about it right now. Beer was like porridge that you drank with a straw. So again, they didn't understand the process. They just knew if we put the I don't think I would quite enjoy
really
that.
gross.
So beer is not what you think about. In fact, beer wasn't what you think about it now until the monks made it what it is now. So even during Roman times, it wasn't even quite the same as what you might think about it now. So beer's been with us for a long time, and it's been changing along the way, what we view as beer. And in fact, it's believed that beer makes an appearance even in the Old Testament. And the history, by the way, a lot of what I'm saying here, I'll make another plug for another book. This is not my book, so I'm not getting anything off of it. But this book called The Beer Option, which is by Dr. R. Jarrett Stout, is actually an excellent resource on the history of beer and the Catholic viewpoint of beer and its morality. So fantastic book. A lot of what I say can be expounded on more if you'd be interested in learning more.
And I'll add links to the show notes too, to these books.
Yes,
and everything. So
I'll give Angela all the links. So if you'd like to take a look at it, please go ahead and do so. It's even believed that beer was part of the Old Testament, what was offered to God in the temple in Jerusalem. So it's not quite phrased this way. In biblical scholars argue that it really means beer because it's called strong drink. So strong drink was offered to God, and it's differentiated. This word is differentiated. I'm sorry, I forgot the Greek word offhand for it, but it's differentiated from wine, and there wasn't really such a thing as whiskey back then. So they think they were missing out. Means beer. Yeah, they're missing out a little bit on the whiskey part. But so it was even a sacrifice to God. Beer was, it's believed, even back in the Old Testament. But beer itself was then, is very popular in ancient times, all the way through Roman times. And so even though it was considered in Roman society as inferior to wine, and I know some people may still consider beer inferior to wine, but that's how the Romans viewed it, as a drink of the poor people. But as the church, as Roman civilization collapsed over time, and as the church kept civilization going, especially through the monasteries and convents, then the monasteries actually continued on the traditions of making wine and making beer. Even though, for example, with the Benedictines, Saint Benedict didn't actually want his monks to have any alcohol. His monks kind of rebelled against him on that point. So he said, okay, you can have your alcohol, you can have your wine or your beer, but it has to be in moderation. The brewing tradition goes way back to the earliest parts of the church. In fact, there's the furthest records that we have of the monks brewing, I believe, like paper records, go back to the 700s of monasteries brewing.
That is way further back than I was expecting.
Yeah, it goes way, way back. And so they had wineries and they had breweries, more breweries in the northern parts of Europe, because the wine, growing the grapes wasn't as easy, especially when it was whether it was England or Ireland or Germany. So there's a lot more of the breweries in those particular monasteries. And so, throughout Christendom and during the Middle Ages, many monasteries had breweries. So it's estimated that around, I think, 18 or 1900 monasteries throughout Europe at one time had a brewery as part of the monastery. And that was before the Napoleonic era. Napoleon kind of wiped things out in the French Revolution, so that after the French Revolution there was, I think, 30 monasteries in Europe from 1900 down to 30 that brewed. So it's starting to make a little bit of a comeback, but so we're at a low ebb even still 200 years later. But yes, beer is definitely played a very important role in the church in communities that even centered around monasteries. So usually the monks would brew beer for the communities as well, and especially
Why did
during
they?
medieval.
Why did they decide to start brewing beer? I mean, like wine, I guess I could understand a little bit more, but beer, why beer for the community?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, in regards to like an alcoholic beverage, yeah, in many cases, uh, wine wasn't really available. They couldn't grow the grapes, and
Right.
so
Yeah.
wine was already a common drink of the commoner, even in ancient times. So the monks went ahead and brewed that. It's just when communities started to form around monasteries, then started to become a demand by the community that they wanted to purchase the beer from the monks, and so the monks would also then, in many cases, supply alcohol or beer to the communities. And also during the Middle Ages, there wasn't really a great. Sometimes the water wasn't the best to drink, so that was in many cases like the only sanitary and drink that even children could have. So beer back then as well wasn't as high alcohol content in many cases. It
Right.
might be 1 or 2% or something like that. And so it was enough to where it was almost acted like a preservative, and that most
Hmm.
people were drinking beer back then in place of water, because the water in many cases wasn't of the best quality.
That's really interesting.
So yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's really really fascinating, and I should also state as well that the church has an official beer blessing as well in the what's called the Roman Ritual, which is the official handbook for the church for all the blessings of different objects and things. So there is an official blessing of beer. So I think that also gives a good indication of the church's stamp
Support.
of approval, if you will, of it. Yes, since the church can't really bless things or objects that are intrinsically evil.
Sacrilegious
So
or yeah.
yes,
Yeah. That's so
exactly.
interesting. Okay. So what are some of the best arguments, because obviously the church, I mean, it has a blessing for beer, for goodness sake. So when people are critical of Catholics, I mean, Catholics kind of have a reputation for drinking too much, I think, sometimes, especially Irish Catholics, which I'm Irish Catholic. You know, how do we talk honestly about this in a way that can get people who are maybe more, I'm thinking more Baptist or something like that, to understand that alcohol is not inherently evil, but like so many other things, I mean, food, for example, overindulgence is the sin, not the thing.
Yes, and so okay, so that's a good point. So several, all right, so several saints have written on this, and by the way, it's interesting. You always find interesting people and arguments online, because I've even run into some Catholics that are very much teetotalers, that are against alcohol in one way or the other. So definitely not even just Baptists. Although you're right, I think that there is certainly a segment of Protestantism that is even still to this day. Even the college
Yeah, it's
that I
very
went to,
puritanical.
the denomination
Yeah.
was against all alcohol. So. Actually, St. Thomas Aquinas, who does a good job in the Summa at putting up steelmen arguments and then kind of dismantling it, talked a bit about this. So I believe, and I'm going to give you the citation here, because who our listeners can go take a look at the full text, and if I'm wrong, they can refer to what St. Thomas actually said.
Yeah, I'll be
But it's
looking at it. I'm
actually
looking at
in
my Summa right now.
okay.
Like, I've got it right here.
There you go. Just
Fact checked you.
casually open it up. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Real time. So in the Summa, it's the second part of the second part. It's question 149, part 3. So actually, question 149, question 150, he deals a lot with drunkenness and the use of alcohol. But actually, in question 149, part 3, he specifically asks, is it unlawful to have wine? And which is a stand-in for all alcohol, really, in the question. And so some of the objections that are brought there that St. Thomas raises is, for example, and this is the most common objection that I've heard, even online or from different people, which is, by drinking, you're actually, other people who struggle with alcohol, now they might be drawn back to alcoholism because now you're making alcohol, or you've put something out
Temptation
about
into
alcohol,
scandal.
and so it's a bad thing.
Yeah, placing an obstacle
because it could lead to
before
this.
the weak. Yes,
exactly. So that's the most common thing that I've heard, and I think that there's also some arguments as well in that. And again, I won't get into too much detail because I don't want to come across as like a Thomist or something like that. I know all the arguments.
Thomism is making a comeback. I think it's okay to be a Thomist.
It's making a comeback. Yeah, it's okay to be a Thomist. But I won't say that I'm an expert in that, at least.
Yeah, that's
but
fair.
I think that there's some other biblical arguments for some passages which on their face might be construed as being against alcohol. And so St. Thomas answers that question in a few different ways. So first of all, St. Paul himself to Timothy actually instructs Timothy to have wine to ease his stomach and to help his general health. So that's the first point that St. Thomas makes, is that it can't really be wrong if St. Paul is telling Timothy to have alcohol. And I know that St. Thomas didn't bring this up in his point, but I will. I mean, I think that if our Lord as well also made it as his first miracle, water into wine, I don't know how it can easily be argued that our Lord made something evil so that other people at a wedding feast who had already been drinking for some time,
right?
Because as it's said in that passage, why are you saving the best for last? So people had already been feasting for quite some time and drinking wine, and our Lord made more wine, and of course the best wine imaginable, and so. Yeah, I mean, I think that biblically it becomes a bit difficult to sustain that wine in and of itself or alcohol generally is intrinsically evil. So that seems to be pretty clear. And in fact, St. Thomas also notes in that question that any type of food or drink necessarily is not unlawful, is not bad in and of itself for consumption. The circumstances may make that a bad thing. So, for example, if you had taken a vow against drinking, or you promised God that you weren't going to drink, or if you were in the presence of someone who, let's just say in the past, had struggled with alcoholism, then it probably would be not only imprudent, but you probably would be sinning if, let's just say, you came over to their house and you brought alcohol with you, and you knew that they struggled with this. Then you might be a source of temptation for them, and an instrument to them sinning. So St. Thomas brings that up as examples where it could be unlawful accidentally, but in and of itself, alcohol use is not intrinsically evil.
So would you say that, like, for example, how would this compare with, say, drug use? Because I think then most people in their minds are going, well, what about like marijuana or some of these other things? Because I've heard kind of the counter argument from many people talking about how, well, marijuana kills less people every year. Less people are, not, their inhibitions aren't quite as strong with marijuana for some people. So, like, how would you talk to them about that? I mean, or any other drug for that matter.
So, and for a really in-depth argument, I'd refer to the book that I was talking about earlier, because it actually has a whole chapter on this that goes really in depth, and I found really fascinating. But okay, so first of all, we'll establish that anything that, let's just say, impairs your reason or your faculties of reason in order to rightly use them is is wrong. So drunkenness, for example, is wrong.
It's
You're
actually a
clearly
mortal
wrong.
sin. Most
Drinking too
people
much.
don't know that drunkenness
Yes.
is a mortal sin. So if you have been drunk, get your little butt over to reconciliation and confess that. That's something I didn't know until I was much older, and I wish I had known that a lot earlier, because I don't know why it didn't occur to me, and I think a lot of people are like me, relatively unthinking. And I just remember feeling almost kind of angry when I realized it, because I think my behavior would have been somewhat different if I had understood the gravity of it prior to that.
Yes, and I think that, well, not to get off on a side tangent, I think generally just, some of these areas of, catechesis or what's talked about in the pulpit, and that's not the only area of sin, right? I mean, I think there's plenty of others that we could rattle off that are hardly discussed, and people only find out about it years later when they're doing their own research into the faith.
Right.
And so you're absolutely right, Angela. That's a good point. So it is mortally sinful. So that's the first point. So anything that impairs our reason in that way, fully, I should say. So we're talking about full drunkenness, and I think that
Right.
St. Thomas, again, the Summa, talks about what constitutes actual drunkenness. It's not necessarily, I feel a little bit of a buzz with drinking. It's it's almost like blackout drunk is what how St. Thomas defines it.
Well, and that's because your brain is
but-
not working. I think I want to pause here for just a second,
Yes.
because I think it, to drive the point home so that people understand, the reason it's wrong is not because drunkenness in and of itself is wrong. What's wrong about it is that it's an affront to the dignity of man, because we were created with an intellect and a will. And when those things are disordered, say when you're in a state of disorder because of using drugs or alcohol in an inordinate way, that's when it becomes a mortal sin. It's not, it's because it's an affront to the dignity of man, just like every other sin. So it takes some time. You could tell people that it's it's a mortal sin, it's wrong. But if they don't understand the why behind it, I just don't think people are convinced. It's just the Catholic Church telling you more rules about what you can and cannot do. They're just trying to tell you more of how you can live your life. They're too involved, but really it's for your good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think to your point there, Angela, for your good, I mean, I think it all comes down to, again, to natural law. So really what we're talking about is natural law, not just a precept of the church that the church just made up out of thin air. This is written
Right.
on the hearts of all men to be able to follow these laws of God in nature. And so, to your point, it's actually impairing brain function. I think that really is the definition of drugs, is something that's impairing your brain function, which is something that let's just take marijuana, for example, because I think that's the most common example that people
Mm-hmm.
use in arguments. And that, marijuana usage is, typically most people don't, and I know that there's plenty of counter arguments to this, like, I just use it sparingly, but
Or
most
medicinally.
people use it to get high, or
Yeah.
medicinally. Yeah. I won't even touch on that part. But yeah. So putting the medicinal part aside, let's just say, for example, that
Recreational
there is
use.
medicinal use for it, recreational use, that typically the point of that is to be out of your mind a bit, to get out of reality, to let reality go, and to get high, and in which case you already are getting to a state where your rational functionalities, you're letting go of that. You don't have control of that anymore, which is, as you pointed out, Angela, that's the reason why drunkenness is a mortal sin. And so, since that generally is the case, like the vast majority of the time, that's why the church says that just recreational use of marijuana is, not acceptable. It's not really analogous to beer. It doesn't really doesn't have the history, the scriptural backing, that beer has as well.
Right.
And so I think there's other arguments as well. It can be made that, beer does have health benefits. I know someone's going to say, well, medicinally it has benefits. I'm putting that aside for marijuana. I mean, alcohol in moderation has been shown to have various health benefits as well.
St. Thomas
provided
Aquinas
it's not
recommends a
abused.
glass of wine when you're experiencing sorrow and a bath. So I
Yes,
personally like that.
exactly.
I don't know about you, but I
Two
like
great recommendations.
solid advice, St. Thomas.
Solid advice.
Yep.
Yes. But, everything that he says really stands the test of time, but I mean, those definitely are very relevant to everyone for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would definitely recommend the book that I mentioned because it goes in great depth, and I know that there's a lot of nuances to the argument, and if someone's watching this and they're thinking, well, what about this and that about marijuana, alcohol, I think that please definitely read up a bit more on it, and I'd recommend that book wholeheartedly, because it touches explicitly on that and the difference between drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, I want to read it actually. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about Saint Thomas, but is there anything that other saints have said about drinking beer? I mean, I would imagine he's not the only one that has liked beer.
Oh yes, yeah, exactly. So there's lots of saints that have said something about beer. So for example, one of our beers that we've made is after Saint Bridget of Ireland, and so she was a 4th century saint. She's actually the co-patroness of Ireland with Saint Patrick. And she has a very famous poem called the Lake of Beer, where she describes heaven itself as God and all the saints around this lake of beer and enjoying beer for all eternity. So, and actually, I think I got it here. So this
read it.
This is it.
It's not too long.
Yeah. So there she is. So we have her with the Lake of Beer. So that's Saint
awesome.
Bridget. And so shout out to Tracy L. Christensen of Portraits of Saints. She's let us use a few of her images, and that's her depiction of Saint Bridget. But yeah, so that's a really famous example of one. There's some others as well in regards to like famous quotes. So Saint Arnold of Metz, he's also a patron of brewers and brewing, and one of his famous quotes was, "From man's sweat and God's love, beer came into the world." So that's one of his. I know he's not a saint yet. Hopefully someday he is. G.K. Chesterton also had some famous quotes, such as in Catholicism, the pint, the pipe, and the cross can all fit together. So there's some other really good quotes that are out there. But yeah, I think generally the saints speak pretty favorably of the moderate and temperate use of alcohol. Yes.
Okay, so what tips would you say? I mean, you're around beer all the time. What are some what's advice that you have for staying prudential and moderate in your drinking? Because I would imagine you've got to be taste testing beer regularly to make sure your batches are good, right? That's the reason.
Research and development. Yes,
exactly. So how have you guys developed kind of remaining faithful doing that and staying away from drunkenness?
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I didn't list this as a question I would ask you, but I'm curious because I come from a family of where we do have alcoholism that runs in our family. So I just would imagine that would be a great temptation.
Sure. Yeah. And I think probably most people have someone in their family or extended family, maybe even in the past, that struggled with alcoholism. I mean, I know that that's the case for, for some people, even, extended family in the past in my family. So, a few things. So, first of all, if you can, try to drink alcohol with food, because alcohol really is part and parcel with food. So it helps to limit the absorption of alcohol, and at the same time it places alcohol in its right context. So you're not just going out, no meal and just loading up and having a 6-pack or something like that, because pretty quickly it's gonna spiral into being a little bit tipsy and maybe a bit more than that, unfortunately. So that's the first thing. Try and drink it with food. The second thing I would say is drink with others if you can. And I'm not saying if someone's by themselves or they're single that they can't have alcohol. No, it's not what I'm saying. But try when it's possible to drink with others, whether it's family or friends. So beer or other alcohol can help facilitate conversations and creating really good friendships. And so your family and friends there too, hopefully they're not enablers, because I guess this could go the other way.
I know
too,
that was
but,
my thought too, is people
they could
who
still
like
be
to
a check.
Well, too, and I think that's something that another thing I'd like to pause on too is like talking about how alcohol actually is similar to food in this way, in that it can really break down barriers and walls between people, and it brings people together in a way that other things don't. That's one thing that makes like breaking bread together so important in a community within the home,
Yes.
right? And beer can do something similar. Alcohol can do something similar, except you also have kind of this additional wall that's broken down, not because you're getting drunk or anything, but you're just more relaxed when you're drinking alcohol, because it is a depressant and it helps kind of relax the body that way. It's not a stimulant, for example, that would excite the body.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, I think that probably most people that have had alcohol probably recognize exactly what you've said, Angela, with kind of relaxing you, taking the edge off. Maybe you're a bit nervous even having a conversation with someone, and that it kind of eases that conversation. You're a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more open to conversation, or maybe you're even more introverted, and that just helps the conversation flow a little bit smoother. And again, not drunkenness, but it just takes that edge off, and it really helps to enable that. So excellent point. And so hopefully though, if you've got good friends, if you get to a point where it's like, maybe we should stop, that hopefully they're a positive force in your life, that they're telling you, okay, let's, take a step back here, and maybe we've had enough. But the third point is, whenever you go into drinking, you should probably have an idea of what your limit is for yourself. And I'm not saying create an arbitrary limit of, I'm only having one just because. I mean, okay, that's fine if you just want to have one drink of whatever it is. But, know that, if I have more than 2 drinks in the sitting, that I'm going to be in a danger zone, or that's not a good place where I want to be. So I would just know that in advance so that you can cut it off, because it's just when you're in the moment, it might just keep on going. So you should just know up front, my limit is whatever it is, 2 drinks, 3 drinks, 1 drink. And so you just know that going in, and I'll help, put a pause on, excessive and continued drinking.
Well, and if you're really social, and kind of get caught up in that social atmosphere of drinking, and that component of like, conversation's going really well, and sometimes maybe you're not paying as much attention to how much you're eating or not eating, that kind of stuff. I think it's really helpful to tell your spouse, if you're married, or a good friend, like, hey, I'm only having 1 or 2. If you see me reaching for that third or that second, tell me to cut it out. Like having some degree of accountability if that's an inclination that you have. Because I can think of even when I sort of got away from viewing alcohol as a way to escape and just get drunk, it was helpful for me to tell my husband, like, I'm only planning on having 1 drink here. And now I don't view alcohol that way. I don't drink it to get drunk the way that I used to when I was younger. But it really helped to have accountability, because I just need that. My will is so weak, or at least it was at the time. It's much better now, but I think that can be helpful for people too.
Yeah, having some type of accountability partner, I think, is a fantastic idea. That can certainly help and kind of put you in check.
Yeah.
And I guess one other thing I will say, it's not part of the 3 points I wanted to bring up, but generally in our so with some of the bad beer, I'll just say, or different types of alcohol that are out there. When I say bad, I mean, let's just say poor quality. Sometimes, and maybe people like, let's just say, a Busch Light or a Miller Lite or whatever the case is, but that type of alcohol, it's not I wouldn't typically drink it because I'm appreciating all the different aspects of this type of beer and all the different flavor profiles that are coming out. And that's the nice part about, let's just say, craft brewing, is because you can really, have a beer or two beers or whatever, but have a beer and be able to appreciate it for what it is and all the flavors that are being drawn out of it and the different, aspects of it. Whereas with some of these other types of beer that you can go out and get a 36 pack of whatever.
And they are like water.
Typically it's not the greatest. It's basically water, and and I'm not saying any people who drink that are, they do it so they get drunk. That's not the case.
Right.
But if you have, if you get into appreciating the beer for what it is and all the different ingredients that God made and was able to, put together for this, then all of a sudden it transforms it into something a bit different. So it's not about just, I'm drinking this just so I can, get a buzz or whatever. It's about appreciating the whole experience.
Yeah, definitely. I would have to agree. I think I find that as a mom who's cooking all the time, like you appreciate that food more and you want it to get eaten, because if it gets wasted on people who don't appreciate it, not my children. I'm just kidding. They always appreciate it. It's like, it changes it. You're more intentional about how you use it. And two, if it's a well-crafted beer, you don't want to drink it very quickly. Like often you can't, that's kind of another difference. You can drink a light beer, Coors Light, pretty quickly because it's mostly water, so there's a kind of a difference there too. Well, I am so grateful that you came on today. It was such a fun interview, and I'm really glad that we got to talk about the history of Tridentine Brewing, beer in general, as well as discussing kind of more of the moral implications of drinking alcohol. Where can people find you and your work? You're pretty busy on Twitter. Are you on any other platforms?
Yeah, so we're on a few different platforms. So first of all, we've got our website, which is tridentinebrewing.com. But we're on Twitter, so we're at Tridentine Brew, and on Instagram at Tridentine Brewing, and on Gab as well at Tridentine Brewing. So active on those three platforms, mostly on Twitter, but all our videos and pictures that we're posting and whatnot, I put on Instagram, and I try and put on Gab as well. So yeah, please go ahead and find us. And I will say this one thing, Angela, is for those that are listening to the interview. So if you're interested,
I don't know if you can hear my kid yelling through the door. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, that's typical. I work from home most of the time, and kids are right on the other side of the door. They're right on the other side of the door right now. So no worries. Okay. So we don't sell our beer right now. We're a hobby home brewery. So we're exploring options at going commercial and what that might look like. So that is on the table. So unfortunately, you can't buy the beer. We're able to give the beer away for different causes, working with individuals like the Mass of the Ages to promote really great, Catholic causes and, things like that. Or so that's been great. We enjoy doing that, considering taking it to the next level. But we have had such an interest in the artwork on the labels and whatnot, and people just wanting to support the work that we do. And so we are looking at opening up a merchandise shop. Not that I did the brewery for that purpose. It's just I keep on getting interest in wanting something from the brewery. So we're going to be opening up that this summer, so people can stay tuned and, follow us on different social media platforms, and we'll announce that later in the summer.
Oh, that's really awesome. I'm excited for you guys. Thank you so much for coming on to Integrated today, and I hope to have you back sometime.
Hi.
That'd be great. Anytime, Angela.
Oh, take care.
You too.
If you enjoyed this episode of Integrated, please like and subscribe here on YouTube and on your favorite podcasting platform. Integrated with Angela Erickson is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Check the description box to see how you can connect with me on social media. And maybe prayerfully consider supporting Integrated on Patreon to help offset the costs of production. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to live life integrated.